In the vernal days of 1883, a solitary abode nestled on the banks of Eagle Creek in the southeastern reaches of the Arizona Territory harbored two women and their offspring. The patriarchs of the family had embarked on an early quest to assess the grim aftermath of Geronimo's recent raid, a ruthless escapade that left their sheep either massacred or pilfered. The perilous solitude imposed upon the women in such dire circumstances was not unfamiliar, having grown accustomed to the persistent threat of Geronimo's return. As the morning sun unfolded, casting its warmth upon the arid landscape, one of the women ventured outside to draw water from a spring concealed amidst a copse of willows, a mere few yards away. A sudden eruption of barks from the house dog lured the remaining women to the window. The only coherent account she could provide was that the apparition was crimson, colossal, and ridden by a malevolent force. Echoes of distress filled the air, yet paralyzed by terror, she barricaded the door, seeking refuge in fervent prayers throughout the day. Nightfall ushered in a return of the men, who, upon hearing the harrowing tale, armed themselves with torches and ventured to scrutinize the mysterious spring. There, amidst the murky soil, they discovered the lifeless form of the second woman, crushed almost to oblivion. Imprinted in the mud were hoofprints, sinisterly cloven and twice the dimensions of a typical horse. Dangling from the willows were strands of lengthy, crimson hair. The coroner dispatched from Solomonsville to conduct an inquiry harbored profound skepticism towards the account. Were it not for the ghastly condition of the remains and the uncanny hoofprints, he might have entertained suspicions of familial foul play. Ultimately, however, he acquiesced to the jury's verdict of death by some unknown means, a pronouncement duly chronicled in the Mojave County Miner, a weekly periodical hailing from Kingman, Arizona. In the wake of those events, a mere span of days later, two gold prospectors engaged in the meticulous pursuit of their fortune along Chase's Creek, a tributary coursing through the wild expanse several miles to the northeast of Eagle Creek, found themselves abruptly roused from their nocturnal repose. Their tent, a feeble sanctuary against the elements, collapsed unceremoniously upon them in the dead of night, accompanied by a disconcerting symphony of screams and thunderous hoofbeats. In the disarray, they beheld an otherworldly spectacle, an astoundingly towering horse galloping off into the thicket, leaving them bewildered in its wake. Determined to authenticate the surreal encounter, the prospectors share their extraordinary tale at the ore mining camp. A group of skeptical miners, lured by the promise of an enigma, acceded to accompany them back to the scene of the uncanny disturbance. Along the creek's bed, they uncovered the indelible marks of colossal hooves, tracing a trail uphill, clearly disrupted by a creature of considerable magnitude. Clinging tenaciously to the verdant foliage were remnants of lengthy red hairs. Despite the earnest testimony of half a dozen miners, whose findings aligned with the sheep ranch incident in striking detail, the prevailing sentiment was one of incredulous amusement. In the lore-soaked atmosphere of the Wild West, tales spun around the campfire held a coveted place as the preferred form of entertainment. The Red Ghost, as the mysterious entity came to be known, became a canvas for embellishment, with storytellers weaving extravagant narratives around its two documented appearances. One aficionado of this narrative boasted a pursuit that culminated in the creature's enigmatic disappearance into thin air, while another recounted a sensational episode of the Red Ghost allegedly slaying and devouring a grizzly bear. Approximately a month following the tragic demise of the ranch woman, the Red Ghost materialized anew, defying the fanciful conjectures of the tall tale weavers. This spectral event unfolded in the vicinity of the Salt River, some 80 miles northwest of Eagle Creek. Cyrus Hamblin, a rancher engaged in the pursuit of stray cattle, ascended a stark ridge for a panoramic view of the surroundings. On the opposing side of the ravine, nestled amid a tableland shrouded in dense chaparral, he discerned the presence of an immense reddish creature maneuvering through the underbrush. Admitting to a momentary chill creeping along the nape of his neck, despite the gaping ravine acting as a natural divide, Hamblin persisted, keen on obtaining a clearer view. Gradually, the mysterious entity traversed into a relatively open expanse, allowing Hamblin to ease his apprehension. Despite the considerable distance, spanning a quarter of a mile, he unequivocally identified the creature. It was a camel. To the average American, and even to many Arizonans, the sight of a wandering camel in the wilderness would rival the astonishment induced by the most fantastical red ghost tales. Hamblin, however, possessed insight garnered from years spent in the desert expanses of the southwestern territory near the California border. Although unfamiliar with camels in the high Salt River region, he recognized their not uncommon presence in the desolate desert terrain. What distinguished this camel from the ordinary was the peculiar burden atop its hump. From the vantage point, Hamblin couldn't discern it distinctly, but he asserted that it bore a semblance to a human figure. If indeed a man, the consensus leaned toward the notion that life had long departed. Hamblin's unblemished reputation and his methodically detailed account lent credibility to the narrative, reviving a nearly forgotten episode in the annals of the West. It reignited the historical embers and provided the imagined denizens of the territory with fertile ground for speculation. Consequently, the Red Ghost, or Fantasia Colorado as christened by Spanish-speaking settlers, swiftly ascended to the ranks of Arizona's most renowned inhabitants. A single point of contention lingered in Hamblin's narrative: the nature of the burden on the camel's back. Skeptics postulated it was nothing more than the camel's distinctive hump. However, a few weeks after Hamblin's encounter, the Red Ghost surfaced anew in the vicinity of the Verde River Valley, some 60 miles west of Hamblin's ranch, laying to rest the skeptics' arguments. This time, a party of 5 prospectors chanced upon the creature grazing on a mesa. Attempts to bring it down proved futile, and it swiftly retreated beyond their firing range. In its wake, an ominous object tumbled from its back. Investigating the curious find, the prospectors uncovered, as recounted by the Mojave County miner, a human skull with a few shreds of flesh and hair still clinging to it. The grisly revelation of the Red Ghost's grisly payload etched its macabre saga into the tapestry of living legend, an odyssey that would endure for nearly a decade. Although the sole contemporary account of this spectral journey is chronicled in the Miner, an era where newspapers scarcely bow to the shackles of accuracy might tempt us to ponder embellishments. However, the details were relayed with such precision and realism that the prospect of embellishment seems implausible. Moreover, these narratives lacked the overtly fanciful fabrications typical of the more imaginative editors of the Western frontier, who were not prone to concocting tales involving the savage malevolence of Red Ghost purportedly bore towards its animal victims. The Red Ghost's narrative, in its denouement, casts a somber shadow over the melancholic chronicles of the U.S. Army's first and singular Camel Corps. Its inception unfolded with sanguine anticipation on March of 1855, when President Franklin Pierce's Secretary of War, Jefferson Davis, successfully lobbied Congress for a $30,000 allocation to procure camels for the Army's Southwest exploration. Despite its belated inception, the concept had simmered in military circles for years, originating in Major George H. Crossman's 1836 proposition that camels, adept at enduring desert terrains with limited water, should be experimented with in lieu of horses or mules. Yet, it took a staggering 19 years for the idea to ascend the bureaucratic ladder. With the funds secured, Davis dispatched Major Henry C. Wayne and Lieutenant David D. Porter to the eastern Mediterranean aboard the naval store ship the Supply to procure the initial batch of camels. Wayne, a seasoned horse trader, meticulously immersed himself in camel lore and scrutinized the offerings in Alexandria and Smyrna's camel markets. His diligence bore fruit too, as 33 camels, acquired at an average cost of $250 each, survived the arduous 3-month journey to Indianola, Texas, with 2 babies born en route, thus inaugurating the curious chronicle of the Camel Corps. In the venture to establish the Camel Corps, Wayne and Porter engaged 6 Arabian men and a Turk, the former designated as camel drivers and mentors to the army's muleteers, while the latter assumed the role of a veterinarian. Their regrettable lapse in judgment in these hires foreshadowed the experiment's eventual downfall. It appeared that they presumed that anybody that hailed from the land of abundant camels must possess an innate expertise in handling these peculiar beasts. However, the reality unfolded quite differently. The Arabian men exhibited a familiarity with camels akin to a contemporary city boy's knowledge of horses, and the Turkish veterinarian's unconventional remedy for any camel ailment involved tickling the creature's nose with a chameleon's tail. Despite these initial setbacks, Wayne's conviction in the potential utility of camels for the army remained unshaken. Upon arriving at Indianola on May 14, 1856, Wayne dispatched Porter back to the Near East for another shipment of camels and led his existing charges overland to the Army's Camp Verde, situated 60 miles northwest of San Antonio. A new challenge arose on the journey, as nearly every horse and mule encountered along the way panicked at the sight of the peculiar beasts in Wayne's custody. This incited fury among the horsemen and teamsters, who squarely blamed the camels for the disruption. By the time Wayne reached Camp Verde, it became evident that his primary task was to win over skeptics and convert them to his perspective on the animals. In a strategic move to foster acceptance, Wayne organized a compelling demonstration. Gathering a group of initially hostile muleteers involved in the experiment, he led out one of his finest camels, commanded it to kneel, and loaded it with 2 substantial hay bales, a load equivalent to what a mule could bear. With a feigned hesitation, Wayne surveyed the load, allowing onlookers to express skepticism. Then, to their amazement, he added 2 more bales to the load. The muleteers, initially incredulous, erupted in cheers when the camel effortlessly rose and strolled away on Wayne's command. It marked the sole recorded instance where a mule skinner endorsed a camel. Wayne's lone convert in this endeavor was Lieutenant Edward F. Beale, a figure of considerable renown in the West. Despite his unusual beginnings in the U.S. Navy, where he enlisted at 14 in 1836, Beale's exploits included rescuing besieged U.S. troops near San Diego alongside Kit Carson in 1846, and transporting the first gold from Sutter's Mill in California to Washington, D.C. Intrigued by new ideas and having resigned from the Navy in 1851 to focus on Western exploration, Beale, at Wayne's insistence, assumed an Army lieutenancy and a role in the Camel Corps. Having undergone rigorous training with the camels, Beale found himself tasked with surveying a route from Fort Defiance, New Mexico, to the eastern frontier of California, traversing the arid landscapes of New Mexico and Arizona. For this expedition, he meticulously selected 25 of the finest camels from Wayne's herd and an additional 44 brought in by Porter on the subsequent journey. Upon completing the survey, essentially tracing what would become the western portion of the renowned U.S. Highway 66, Beale became unequivocally convinced that the camel held the key to resolving the Southwest's transportation challenges. This conviction eventually resonated with the War Department. In December 1858, John B. Floyd, succeeding Jefferson Davis as Secretary of War, officially acknowledged the experiment's success, urging Congress to approve the importation of 1,000 more camels. However, As fate would have it, by that time, Congress was embroiled in the preliminary stages of the Civil War, diverting its attention away from the matter. This fortuitous diversion spared potential camels from encountering the harsh treatment already meted out to those in their midst, strangers in a land where their unfamiliarity justified cruelty. This period unfolded long after the demise of the original Arabian men, when the camels were reduced to mere fragments of colorful memory. Erecting a monument to honor them would have been inconceivable to those Wayne, Beale, and their aides attempting to train as camel drivers. To the average cowhand and mule skinner, the camels were confounding abominations, and the sentiment was reciprocated. While camels are highly domesticated animals, their comprehension requires familiarity. In their North African and Asiatic homelands, they are treated with care and respect, a stark contrast to the mistreatment they endured in the American Southwest. The Hollywood-conceived legend of the old-time cowboy's affection for his horse stands in stark contrast to the grim reality. Owen Wister, in an early draft of his stories, depicted an enraged cowhand gouging out a horse's eyes, a scene Theodore Roosevelt implored him to omit, not for its unrealism, but for fear of encouraging cruelty. Even riders known for their sanity often subjected their mounts to merciless brutality. Mule skinners earned their title for a reason. Wielding weighted whips, they were known to strip bits of hide from their animals. However, when individuals attempted similar mistreatment with camels, they found themselves on the receiving end of retaliation. At Camp Verde in Texas, shortly after the arrival of the initial camels, a muleteer, overwhelmed by frustration, kicked a camel in the belly. The camel, refusing to be subdued, retaliated by spitting a repulsive wad of cud into the man's face. Enraged, the muleteer swung a club at the camel, only for the creature to skillfully evade the blow, emitting a piercing scream before lacerating the man's arm with its formidable tusk-like incisors. The initiation of an unrelenting conflict between the army's mule skinners and the camels unfolded after a fateful encounter. The camels, with their knack for accurately and copiously spitting on those who provoked their ire, inadvertently fueled the wrath of these men. This retaliatory behavior, coupled with the camels' seemingly disdainful expressions and their vocal expressions of discontent during loading, instilled a deep-seated loathing among those tasked with their care, bordering on obsession. Upon his transfer to the east, Lieutenant Beale recognized that the men's vehement aversion to the camels posed a formidable hurdle to his plans. Leaving the camels under the men's care without his direct supervision proved impossible. A teamster, in a fit of rage, attacked one of the camels that had shed what it deemed an excessive load. In attempting to subdue the animal through force, the man met a tragic end as the camel went berserk, trampling him to death before his companions could intervene. Even stern retribution against teamsters mistreating the camels yielded little change in behavior. Beale's subsequent transfer marked the de facto conclusion of the experiment, although the Army took its time, formalizing its abandonment. As Beale departed, the camels dispersed among military posts stretching from Texas to California. Those reluctantly entrusted with their care ingeniously orchestrated the camels' gradual escape into the desert. By the project's official abandonment in 1863, only a meager 30 or so camels remained for auction in California. Upon lobbying by concerned individuals, however, the state legislature banned the use of camels on public roads, citing their tendency to startle horses and mules. Two of the original handlers then herded the camels south to Yuma in the Arizona Territory. In an unexpected turn of events, one of the handlers abandoned his post, leaving High Jolly, the lone handler left, burdened with the care of the camels. For a time, High Jolly eked out a living by utilizing the camels to transport water along the arid stretches of the wagon road, selling it to parched travelers. However, even he succumbed to the challenges, relinquishing the care of the animals sometime in the late 1860s, setting them free in the wild expanse. Subsequently, the more fortunate camels found themselves thrust into a harsh existence, offending for themselves in the unforgiving desert. This fate, while undoubtedly challenging for creatures shaped by millennia of domestication, proved preferable to the grim destiny that befell those occasionally recaptured. Periodically, prospectors or cowhands stumbled upon these camels, often repurposing them for target practice. On occasion, a resourceful freighter made half-hearted attempts to reintegrate a few of these beasts into labor, but inevitably, some fell into the hands of sadists who devised more imaginative and brutal uses for them. The Red Ghost, as it came to be known, bore witness to such cruel treatment. The load it carried on its back hinted at a tragic narrative. In the early days of the Red Ghost's notoriety, the prevailing belief was that the corpse affixed to its back belonged to a desperate traveler who, weakened by thirst, had tethered himself in the hope that the camel would lead him to water. However, upon closer examination of the animal, it became apparent that the rawhide straps securing the burden were manipulated in a manner inconceivable for a man in such a desperate predicament. The enigma revolved around whether the man was still alive when bound to the camel's back. If alive, hatred toward the camel couldn't be the sole motive behind this cruel act. It remains an unresolved question, one likely destined to linger in uncertainty. Regardless of the man's state, the grim truth emerged. The person who bound himself to the camel was unmistakably a white man. The Apaches and other indigenous people in the region, while practicing customs that may appear cruel to us, would never have deemed it acceptable to squander a valuable source of meat, such as a camel. The individual responsible for subjecting the camel to its torment succeeded in inflicting suffering, but true to its species, the camel refused to endure its agony in silent submission. While it claimed only one human life, it unleashed attacks on people almost every time it crossed paths with them in the initial months of its anguish. The one instance it chose to flee rather than assail occurred when a party of prospectors fired upon it near the Verde River. A few days later, a freighter, whose cargo included several kegs of whiskey, paused his wagon train for the night along the Verde, several miles to the north, setting the stage for a night filled with bizarre occurrences. According to their accounts, as they settled down for the night, a sudden and otherworldly scream shattered the tranquil silence. A colossal beast, estimated to be at least 30 feet high, descended with wings that seemingly spanned the entire sky. Its landing shook the ground like an earthquake, toppling two wagons. Terrified men and mules scattered, some plunging into the river. Upon their cautious return the next morning, the only remnants were the prints of massive cloven hooves and a smattering of red hairs clinging to one of the overturned wagons. While subsequent depredations were attributed to the camel, including breaking into cabins, collapsing mine entrances, and inciting cattle or horse stampedes, it remains uncertain whether these acts were truly the work of the camel or the result of other creatures, mischief makers, or the imaginations of those who claimed victimhood. Nearly a year after the camel's fatal trampling of the woman at Eagle Creek, the last recorded violent encounter transpired. At dusk, a cowhand from the Anchor JOT Ranch east of Phoenix, riding past a branding corral seemingly empty outside of a roundup season, encountered an unusual presence within. Drawing from his lariat, he approached the corral's gate to investigate, only for a charging camel to emerge. Instinctively, he lassoed the creature, realizing only afterward that he had captured a camel. His regrets were superseded by the abrupt collision of the camel with his horses, sending both horse and rider crashing to the ground. The camel, unfazed, continued into the night, still carrying the remnants of a burden that once was a man on its back. This marked not only the camel's final assault, but also the last documented instance of its grisly cargo. Presumably, the camel shed the remaining burden soon after this encounter. With that, the Red Ghost relinquished the driving force behind its violent tendencies and the distinguishing mark that set it apart from its kin. As the years elapsed, it gradually transitioned from a terrifying reality into a tale spun to terrify the uninitiated. Had that been the culmination of the saga, it likely would have faded into obscurity, perhaps dismissed as just another fantastical tale woven into the fabric of the Wild West lore. Yet, nearly a decade after its initial appearance, the Red Ghost staged a final act, chronicled by the Mojave County Miner on February 25, 1893. Mizzou Hastings, a rancher from Orr, played the role of the exorcist in this ghostly encounter. His ranch, situated slightly above the gold camp on the San Francisco River, provided the stage for an unexpected morning revelation. Peering through his cabin window, Mizzou spotted a sizable red camel feasting in his turnip patch. Without hesitation, Mizzou steadied himself on the windowsill and took a decisive shot, felling the camel. Upon closer inspection, it became apparent that the camel bore the scars of a tumultuous existence, entangled in a web of knotted rawhide strips that had etched into its flesh over time. This episode nearly marked the conclusion of the American desert's camel story, but not entirely. One Southwest historian asserts that the last credible sighting of a camel occurred in 1901, when a survey crew reported one while delineating the international boundary between Arizona and Mexico. Another account, deemed truthful by a Santa Fe Railroad crew, tells of a sighting near Wickenburg, Arizona in 1913. A third narrative piques curiosity with tales of a camel stampeding horses near Banning, California, just 25 miles west of Palm Springs in 1929. In 1941, reports emerged from the territory east of the Salton Sea. Even in 1957, a part-time prospector and desert aficionado, though personally unacquainted with the site, remained convinced that camels still roamed the scorched hills of Sonora and Baja California. These whispers resemble the echoes of the Red Ghost, faint but enduring reminders of the unique horrors our species can perpetrate, and the remarkable resilience of Old West legends.